Okay, we are back in the saddle today. Hoot doot doo doo, hoot doot doo doo. That's Holiday for Strings, is old music. Uh, Thank you and welcome back to the Jew Curious show, especially the faithful listeners and watchers who stuck out. We're about 12 minutes after 9. I like to start these things at 9. My software's been going hinky, and I think I know why. This is a little bit of station identification. This is the Jew Curious show. You are in the right place if you are curious about Judaism, and I'm your friendly neighborhood rabbi, John Carrier. I'm going to go ahead and show you my face so you know what it is we're talking about. We're not talking about my face, but but I am your friendly neighborhood rabbi, John Carrier, and I am here to teach you about Judaism, to teach you about Jewish tradition, Jewish stuff, Jewish people, because I firmly believe that learning about Judaism, about Jewish wisdom, traditions, customs, and getting to know Jewish people can give you a life of greater meaning, a life of greater joy, greater human connection, and personal growth. And I know this because that's what it did for me. And I wasn't born Jewish, but I've been Jewish for now entering my 20th Jewish year, and I've been a rabbi for about 5 years now. You don't have to go that far. Like, I just kind of turned it up to 11. But so many great changes in my life, so many of the blessings that I have today are because of this learning I've been doing, the community that I've gotten involved with, and and people held the door open for me the whole time. There were always, some people like, this isn't for everybody. Being a Jew isn't the easiest thing in the world. and some people were sort of discouraging of it. But for the most part, teachers, friends, mentors have held the door open for me. And so now I'm here to hold the door open for you. I'm not going to be pushy. I'm not going to push you in. It's really not a thing that we do. We don't go out door to door, knocking on the doors and saying, "Have you heard the good news about Moses?" It's actually probably the best-selling book of all time. So if you haven't heard by now, you know, you should probably get cracking on that. But I'm here just to answer whatever questions you have about Judaism. I think the reason that I had a little technical difficulty this morning is because there's one sort of main thing that's on my mind and is probably on other people's minds as well. And these are the mass shootings that happened. I think it was over the weekend. 20 people killed in El Paso. 13 hours later, 9 people killed in Dayton, Ohio. And you don't necessarily have to ask me about that. This is an Ask Me Anything day, and I do mean anything. But whatever learning that we do today, I want to do in honor of the victims of those shootings, in honor of the helpers who ran in. There was a story, I believe it was in Dayton, Ohio, of a nurse who was on the scene and went to help out the victims immediately. And so I want to do whatever learning we do today, I want to do it in honor of those we have lost. And I want to do it in honor of those who care for them and pray for their strength and pray for strength and comfort for the families of those who have lost people. And when I typed in the subject of today's show, I went to type in learning in honor of mass shooting victims, because I want people who want to talk about this, who want to process this, to be able to find it. And I think when I typed in mass shooting, Twitch, for right or wrong, blocked that, because they don't want people to either broadcast mass shootings, and I think that's a good thing, because most of these folks, in a very grim way, are just looking for attention. And so it took me a few times to figure out that Twitch was filtering out that title. And so just echo some thoughts in here. Nawa64 says, may they rest in peace, and condolence for their families. Absolutely. And so I want to do, just maybe process this a little bit, maybe share some of my feelings, ask what your feelings are about this. I don't have immediate solution. I have some ideas that some people would find maybe a little bit political for a rabbi podcast. But in any case, I just want to be present with people who are suffering right now, people who are anxious about this, whether it's, somebody who was lost, or whether it just breaks your heart once again that this happens so often. And there are those who rush to say, well, it's not my fault, or it's not guns' fault, or it's not, it's just clearly mental illness, and we have to do something about that. For my money, like, America doesn't have a monopoly on mental illness the way we have a monopoly on uh, seemingly random mass casualty events. I'm always brought to mind, there was an Onion headline that gets circulated occasionally that originated many years ago. Um, you know, we're in shock that this could happen here, says only nation where it ever happens. And so this seems to be an epidemic in the United States, and almost exclusively in the United States. Yes, there are mass shooting and mass casualty events elsewhere in the world, but in no country of the scale and frequency that it happens here. And so I think we have to look at it as a public health problem. I think we have to look at it as an epidemic, and roll up our sleeves and figure out what the hell we're going to do about it. And so if this is if this is a little bit upsetting for me to talk about this morning, I just wanted to get that off my chest. I want to make this a safe place for people to talk about it, who want to talk about it. If you're looking for any kind of Jewish wisdom on this, I did bring one particular Mishnah that I want to teach this morning. Other than that, I'll open it up to people's questions. You want to know how to light Shabbos candles, want to know, what's the deal with Tisha B'Av? That's coming up in less than a week. And so we could talk about that as well. But here in a bit, I'm going to go over, say hi to folks in the chat, and then there's a Mishnah that I want to teach that I think speaks to this moment. So get in with a little bit of go juice. That's good, Folgers. Get no money from the Folgers people, by the way. Let's see. We got some folks in here. We got KG Wilcox. Good morning, all. KG's from Philadelphia area. Sky in Bow. Nice to see you. Good morning. Neshama says, good morning. Good morning, Neshama. We got some pretzel rocks on in the back. I'm going to go ahead and turn the music off because I think I got it turned all the way down anyway. And so we won't get any more announcements of songs that are playing that you can't hear. All right, Nawa64, may they rest in peace, and condolences for their families. KG Wilcox says, I read today, Newtown was the end of the gun control debate. Once we decided that the murder of children was acceptable, the debate was over. And I believe I've heard that as well. Radio Angel says, a lot of people have been blaming mental illness and even video games. And some might find it ironic that we're talking about this on a platform, Twitch, which is primarily used for streaming video game play. And I'll say the majority of the video game play that's streamed is things like, Fortnite and Overwatch and other, let's say, shoot 'em up related games. When I play games here, I try to keep it to the family-friendly stuff. I have been playing Splatoon, which has kind of a gun element to it, but it's more, paintball or splashing paint on people. Or not even people, and like squids and things like that. So I'm sort of rethinking that even. But yes, this is a platform where people stream video games that are violent video games, and I think it's I think it's misplaced to blame video games for this. There's a book that I looked at many years ago. I want to reread it. It was an Army psychologist talking. The book is I think the guy's name is Grossman. And wrote a great book called On Killing, and it talks about how methods the Army uses to desensitize new recruits so that they're able to do their jobs, so that they're able to shoot people when they have to do that to keep other people safe. And so part of the desensitization was to introduce the soldiers to these games like Halo and whatnot that made it the neural pathways to pulling triggers less blocked than I think our overall society would have us, have those neural pathways blocked. And we had to get over that. I think there's a host of other things going on. I think the availability of certain types of firearms have certainly contributed to it. And mental illness, like here again, there's no more, I can't believe that there's significantly more mental illness in the United States proportionally than there is in any other country. And yet you go down the list of countries with the similar access to firearms, similar availability of video games, and just nothing compared to what we have here. Let's see. K Dixie says, Ruthie says hi to all of you. Hi, good to see Kathy. K Dixie is here. KG Wilcox is here. So welcome, everybody. Radio Angel says, it seems like they're all just deflecting responsibility. God forbid you have to turn your back on the NRA. Like, God forbid you've taken money from a certain political organization and you can't act with any kind of courage or take responsibility for what's going on. And I've been thinking a lot about it. Like, what are the common denominators? The common denominators are the people involved are almost exclusively white, mostly young men who are unmarried, who don't have children. There's probably an intersectionality of economic opportunity and things like that. I think there's been for all the right reasons, a displacement of patriarchy over the last 10, 20 years. And it's left a lot of people who were told this is your place in the world, that you no longer have the same place in the world. And it's told people that, the value of human life is subordinate to the place in society that you are owed. And I think that's what's happening when we see these various manifestos of hate saying, okay, blaming it all on minorities or immigrants and things like that, it's ridiculous. But it's the language of somebody who has been told that they are displaced by, fill in the scapegoat group here, and you have license to exercise your replacement in power at the cost of human life. And I think that is a common thread as to what's going on here. I don't think mental illness explains it. I think it has more to do with moral illness, which is a societal illness that manifests itself on the individual level in egregious ways. So again, this is just kind of my stream of thought over the last couple of days since we've had twofer, since we've had two of these, and this isn't even the first time we've had two events like this on the same day in the last couple of years. So KG Wilcox is suggesting disarm all white males under the age of 35, and I'll say good luck with that. In the current political climate, I don't know that that's necessarily the solution, but I think that we need to get over 19, 20, 21 something young men being groomed to think that they are owed a certain place in society and are allowed to take life if they don't get that. So that's kind of my opinion about it at this point. So as one of my mentors, who I'm going to see a little bit later today, Rabbi Dan Shevitz, says, don't tell people what to do, just teach Torah. So what I do want to do is teach a little bit of Torah to this, and that is Mishnah from Sanhedrin. I don't have the wherewithal to bring it up on the screen. I should be able to bring it up on the screen. I'll work on my own Streamlab knowledge, but I will read it to you. And it's from Mishnah Sanhedrin. And the Mishnah is a work of the 2nd century of the Common Era. It's a collection of previous centuries oral Torah Shabbal Peh, discussions that rabbis would have about the Torah to help elucidate what is in the Torah. And about the year 120 to 200 of the Common Era, they took all this oral tradition and wrote it down because of the decimation of the population of scholars post-Roman conquest of Jerusalem. And so they said, we're going to break our, normally we don't write this stuff down, but we're going to write all this stuff down. And we got, 6 orders or 6 volumes and various different tractates. Mishnah Sanhedrin talks largely about a kind of rabbinic court system or Jewish court system for adjudicating cases of law back in the day when we had the sovereignty to adjudicate our own cases in our communities pre-Roman conquest. And they talk about, okay, how did the Sanhedrin handle different kinds of cases? Well, they handle money cases one way, and they handle capital cases separately. And so, for instance, and one thing that is very clear is that they were very, very careful about capital cases. Now, people have been reading the Bible, and I highly recommend it, especially the Torah, the earlier parts, the first 5 books. It talks about all these different things that would make someone liable for the death penalty. Murder and adultery and gathering sticks on Shabbat. There are so many places in the Torah it says, if you do this, you will surely die. And so many people assumed right off the bat that meant like judicial capital punishment. And other interpretations are you will die in the sense that God will judge you. And it doesn't give human beings the right to take your life necessarily. For people advocating for capital punishment these days, it says in the Bible, if somebody does this thing, you get to kill that guy. Whereas in the Jewish tradition, going back a couple of thousand years, they said, okay, not so fast. Maybe this means that their soul will die, or maybe this means that God will take their life. It doesn't necessarily give us the power to take their life. And so what they did in the court system a couple thousand years ago was be very, very careful about the rules of evidence for capital cases. Somebody in the Jew Curious School this past week was asking about adultery, it's Exodus 2010 Exodus 2010. It talks about the 10 Commandments, or maybe it's 2012, and then around Leviticus chapter 20, I want to say either verse 10 or 12 or 20, it says, okay, for adulterers shall be put to death, and it requires a certain number of witnesses. And we just read this in last week's Parsha in Matot Maseh, where it's talking about setting up cities of refuge for people who kill someone accidentally, in a case of manslaughter, for example. And it goes to great pains to say if, someone is accused of murder, they can only be convicted on the testimony of 2 witnesses. And so, yes, there are cases in which capital punishment may apply, but even in the Torah, that's a pretty high standard of evidence, having 2 witnesses who observed the crime. It's not just, my word against his. It has to be 2 independent witnesses who saw something happen. And then further, Sanhedrin says, okay, it's not just the number of witnesses, but we have to treat all the witnesses a certain way because this is a serious thing. In Judaism, we appreciate life above just about everything else. And so if there's a chance that somebody might be put to death, even for something that they did on purpose, we have to be very careful how we look at the case and question the witnesses. And that's where we come into Mishnah Sanhedrin 4. This is chapter 4 of Masechet Sanhedrin in the Mishnah. Just going to check the chat real quick before I get into it. Let's see. Good to say. K. Dixie saying, Rabbi Jake, Trig and Chris here on YouTube. Glad to see you all on YouTube. I'll say if you want to participate in the live chat, I do check the chat on YouTube and Facebook periodically. I'll answer questions in Twitch, and then after the broadcast is over, I get to the questions that are in YouTube and Facebook. So I want to answer all the questions that are asked, but I can only monitor one chat stream at a time. So just wanted to check the chat now. Get back to the Mishnah that I'm teaching. And so if you want to follow along, there's a great site called Sefaria. In fact, I'm going to copy the link into the chat. So if anybody wants to follow along with what I'm looking at, let's see, go back to that. Copy. So I'm going to put this in the chat stream here for people who want to follow along. Sefaria is a great site that I use all the time for pulling up Jewish texts and commentary on those texts in Hebrew and English and some Aramaic in there as well. Neither here nor there, but that's the page that I'm looking at. I just put the link in the chat. So we're in Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 4, verse 5. Before I get into it, I'm just going to say a quick bracha, a quick blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. That is, we bless God, sovereign of our lives, who makes our lives special and holy with commandments, with mitzvot, and gives us the commandment to study Torah together. So here we go. So when they're talking about, then this sounds like it's going to be a little bit technical, a little bit in the weeds, but bear with me because the conclusion to this Mishnah is profound. So they're talking about how to address witnesses in capital cases. And they say, how do they admonish? They sort of warn people ahead of time, don't give false testimony. This is serious. How do they admonish witnesses in capital cases? Well, they brought them in and admonished them, saying, perhaps you will say something that is only a supposition or hearsay or secondhand, or even from a trustworthy person. Or perhaps you do not know that we shall check you with examination and inquiry. Meaning, if you're coming in to witness in a capital case, you must have seen that thing yourself. And so we're just giving you an out here. Perhaps you didn't really see this, but you heard about it from somebody you really trust. Maybe it's secondhand. So just before you start testifying, let's make sure that you're in the right place, buddy. Know, moreover, that capital cases are not like non-capital cases. In non-capital cases, a man can pay money and make atonement, but in capital cases, the witness is answerable for the blood of him that is wrongfully condemned. Meaning, if you are a witness in a capital case and somebody dies because of this, and if you are answerable for that blood. So if you gave false testimony in a capital case, and I believe that includes evading responsibility for capital crimes happening now. If you are testify falsely and somebody is killed on that behalf, you are responsible for that, and their blood is on you, and the blood of his descendants that should have been born to him to the end of the world. So that's the principle that, if you say in Judaism, if you save a life, it's like saving an entire world. And if you take a life, it's like destroying an entire world because of all the potential offspring that could either have been saved or obliterated. So, for we have found it with Cain that murdered his brother, for it says, the bloods of your brother, it says damim in that sentence in Genesis 4, verse 10. It says, the bloods of your brother cry out. It doesn't say the blood of your brother, the dam, but rather the damim, the bloods of your brother, meaning his blood and the blood of all his descendants. Another poignant realization in the gravity of the crimes that are going on right now. The bloods of your brother, let's see, meaning his blood and blood of all his descendants. Another saying in the bloods of your brother is that his blood was cast over trees and stones. Therefore, but a single person was created in the world to teach that if any man has caused a single life to perish from Israel, he is deemed by Scripture as if he had caused a whole world to perish. And anyone who saves a single soul from Israel, he is deemed by Scripture as if he had saved a whole world. Again, but a single person was created for the sake of peace among humankind. And here it's getting into a number of reasons or learnings from the fact that God created humanity singly. There are other creation myths out there where the deity created a whole population of people at once. And there's, different regions, different peoples have different versions of this, and they think, well, there was some particular creation story about, God created 120 people at once, or God created a whole nation at once. And sometimes that's to explain human diversity. We have our own explanation for that. That's the Tower of Babel. But these are the things that we can learn from the fact that God chose to create humanity singly or dually. And there's a couple of different versions of this. The first version of the creation of humanity is that God created male and female simultaneously. That's Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. It says God created one man and then created a woman from him. But here is what we can learn from either of those cases. Let's see. Where were we? Again, but a single person was created for the sake of peace among humankind, that one should not say to another, my father was greater than your father. And so many of these mass casualty events come after the publication of a manifesto or the sharing of a manifesto, this notion that one people is greater than another, and therefore the lesser nations' lives are forfeit or subject to the will of the so-called greater nation. But God didn't make the world that way. And especially if you want to use religion to justify this kind of violence, I'm not going to diminish anybody's natural intelligence. I'll say you're just wrong. You're woefully uneducated. Again, but a single person was created against the heretics, so they should say there are many ruling. They should not say there are many ruling powers in heaven. This is another thing that we learn from this. Again, but a single person was created, here's another one, to proclaim the greatness of the Holy Blessed One. For humans stamp many coins with one seal, and they are all alike, or they are all like one another. That is, when a human king wants to mint currency, they take one mold, and they strike many coins off that mold, and the coins are all identical, which is very handy if you're, trying to have, a currency for trade and things like that. But when humans create coins with one seal, they all look like each other. But the King of Kings, the Holy Blessed One, has stamped every human with the seal of the first person, yet not one of them are like another. This is the difference between human beings and God. When we start with one thing and imitate and duplicate it, they all look alike. But the greatness of God is that God can start with one person to teach us, nobody can say my father was better than your father or my people is better than your people. And yet, from that one person, we get the breadth and the depth of human diversity. And if perhaps a witness should say, the King of Kings, the Holy Blessed One, has stamped every human with the seal of the first person, created in the image of God, by the way, yet none of them are like another. And that's that's a tough thing to get your head around. The idea that humanity was created in the image of God, and yet, and that's true of every single human being on earth, and yet we can look so different. Our image can be so different, but we are all created in some aspect as images of the Holy One. So that's the Mishnah that I wanted to teach to this moment. And I think I've shared this Mishnah before in similar contexts because these things keep happening. Just to remind people, and this isn't a new thought, this is the Mishnah going back 1,800 years, which is actually a recording of much earlier oral tradition. So for over 2,000 years, we've had this tradition that God created humans singly. And again, this is a commentary on a much older source. God created humans singly so that we would not go around saying, well, my people are better than your people, therefore I have a natural right to violate, harm, exterminate your people, which I think is another thread running through many of these mass casualty events, is an expressed entitlement on the part of the murderers, as saying, well, in Christchurch, it was somebody saying, well, we can't, I have my people are better than the Muslim people, so I have the right to destroy them. I think in Sri Lanka, it was groups targeting Christians and said, my people is better than the Christian people here, so I have a right to destroy them. And it's pretty clear that the killer in El Paso, I'd seen less about the motivations of the killer in Dayton, Ohio. It seemed more like an ill high school student who had lists of people that he wanted to kill or otherwise harm. But it was pretty explicit that the killer in El Paso drove hours and hours. It's a long drive from Dallas to El Paso with the express wish of killing people from Mexico. And darned if we're not encouraging that kind of behavior with some national level policies. And so it was clear that what he was doing was saying, my people are better than your people, such that I have the right and even the responsibility to take life. And that is so contrary to Scripture, to wisdom about that Scripture, that it is obscene. It is an affront to God. And anyone who would use Scripture for separating peoples like this, as one of my teachers would say, isn't teaching Torah, they're burning it. And even if that's the Jewish perspective, if you are holding a Bible in your hand and using it as a justification to destroy life, you might as well be destroying that Bible wherever you're coming from. There were the religious sects who were dedicated to the genocide of the other and justifying it with Scripture. And that's because you can get desperate fundamentalists to do just about anything if you can brainwash them enough. The Southern Baptist, and I don't want to call out Christianity, but I just was reading something recently from a Southern Baptist website saying, the Southern Baptist movement was created to promote segregation. And because there were Baptists that were uncomfortable that people of color were coming into their church. So they said, well, let's start another kind of Baptists where we teach that based on the sin of Ham, the son of Noah, that his descendants are to be the drawers of water and the hewers of wood and are to be kept apart. And so in the foundational principles of the Southern Baptist movement was built in the denigration of black people. And they're still wrestling with that today. And there are Southern, there are black congregations and black ministers who are saying, we're better than this. Let's keep promoting the kind of religion we want to promote, but let's let go of this ancient garbage that we've allowed to pollute our expression of faith. So, sorry, get on a little bit of a soapbox this morning. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. I think it's important that we talk about it, and I wanted to make a place that other people could talk about this if they wish to. But that's the Torah that I want to teach through this moment, until and unless we can recognize that we were all created by the same God, whether you believe that was immediately or ancestrally, or not. Like you don't have to believe what I believe. I'm here to teach a particular wisdom tradition that was given to me and that has changed my life. But you could also just look at science. You could look at the evolution of humanity. And when people say, well, we're genetically different, and there are all these tests that you can, swab your cheek and for $30 figure out if you're German or African or whatever. And and I say that's adorable. But the fact is that human beings are 99.99999% genetically identical. Human beings and chimpanzees are 97 or 99.5% genetically identical. Human beings and bananas are about 93% genetically identical. And so if you're going to use these kinds of pseudosciences to prove your point about your right to destroy people or alienate people or imprison people, get a job. Like seriously, get a job, support a family, learn the value of human life when you are responsible for it. And that's where people stop this nonsense. I think not for nothing, it's usually single, almost always childless males who are committing these crimes, people who have not taken responsibility for a family, people who have not taken responsibility for their communities, but instead act with this extreme selfishness based on some and maybe mental illness is a factor, but I think it's really a moral failure of those people's families and those people's communities that gave them, access to this kind of thought, and a country that refuses to curtail access to military weaponry for civilians who have no business using them. So that's my thought for the day. People who have, Radio Angel says, people who have the ability to share their messages around the world in a moment must be responsible and not fan the flames of extremism or hate. I agree with you 100%. I will say, and I'm a big fan of the internet as a teaching tool and as a tool for democracy, as a tool for sharing information. I think on the one hand, it's allowed people who have similar goals and similar values who felt isolated to now realize that there are other people out there with their goals and their values. And it's been a boon to building communities. It's been a boon to building our community, the Jew Curious community. We, excuse me, get a little froggies this morning. This community was built so that people who maybe didn't have access to a traditional Jewish community locally could connect with one another around the country and around the world. And that it has only been possible because of what we can do using the tool of the internet. At the same time, it's taken other people who were, otherwise isolated, who had hateful opinions and hateful agendas, to find other people with hateful opinions and hateful agendas to support them, or to encourage them, or to get some terrible data that supports their bogus theories of human value. And so it's allowed those kinds of things to coalesce into, human tumors of hate as well. And so with this tool, we've done good. With this tool, we've done bad. But I think when we have this intersection of not only the mass availability of information, but also the mass availability of propaganda and lies, coupled with a class of people, young white males for the most part, who have been disenfranchised by the obviation of the patriarchy, are now encouraged to do violence and have and besides just the internet, have the physical tools of military grade weaponry to perpetrate that violence. And perhaps that's why this is a uniquely American phenomenon. I don't know. I'm not going to claim to have all the answers. My job here is to just, share my opinion based on what I've learned about this, based on places I've lived and people that I've talked to let you share your opinion here as well, and mostly to teach the Torah to this moment, is that every single person alive was created in the image of God and deserves the dignity and respect as such. That's what we're learning from Masechet Sanhedrin. That's what we're learning from Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, in the story of Cain and Abel. And I think that's the message that needs to be heard. And so that if one person says, I need to destroy somebody, and my pastor told me that the Bible told me so, know that there are other pastors with other views on the Bible that should give you pause to say that, look, you are not a victim. You were created in the image of God, and you have the capacity to kill. But if you do, you are destroying an entire world. You also have the capacity to heal and to save. And if you do, you are creating or saving an entire world. Right? If you want to shoot guns, go to a gun range. Join the Army where you'll be trained to use them properly. Join the law enforcement where you'll be trained to use them properly and responsibly. If you want to promote your race, start a family. Take care, hold a vulnerable child in your arms one time, and you might have a vastly different opinion of human life and your responsibility for preserving it. So, got a couple long comments in here that I want to share with people before the scroll disappears. Let's see. Speaker AJ says, I'm trying to get away from calling these people mentally ill because while I would say that in the past, friends have pointed out the very valid point that it demeans people who really do suffer from mental illness and conflate mental illness with hate. There is a great rabbi on Twitter, Rabbi Rudy Reagan, who does a lot of advocacy for disabilities, physical and mental disabilities and things like that. And she's saying, like, every time you trot out mental illness to explain this stuff, you are painting everybody with mental illness with this same brush. Like, everybody with a mental illness is capable of harming others and should be treated as such. And I think Speaker AJ is right on point with that, right? I think mental illness, yes, there's a mental illness, but again, my opinion, there's more of a moral illness going on that transcends the personal level and goes to families and communities. It is an illness because it's pathological and it's harmful and it's not normal. But yeah, we can't paint everybody with a mental illness with the same brush. And I think that's sort of a dodge for taking responsibility for their behavior anyway. When we call people, that's what I'll say about that. Now, 64 says, I think the various social media platforms should take more responsibility to monitor hate speech in all forms. And I think they're trying. And this is my opinion as somebody who uses social media quite a bit in what I teach. Like I said, we were about 10 minutes late starting today because I was trying to name this stream a learning in honor of mass shooting victims, and Twitch had an automatic filter for the words mass shooting and victims that I wasn't able to start the stream and I think they're taking responsibility and they're saying, okay, we're not going to let people live stream crimes. We're not going to let people, but at the same time, it's sort of suppressing discussion on the topic. I've had my own issues with Facebook, and I'm streaming this live on Facebook now. But some issues I've had with Facebook is that it has blocked my Jewish teaching content because it had the word Jewish in it. But it has also not blocked overt Nazi propaganda that exists on Facebook. I think they're trying to figure it out. When they've got basically a printing press that 2 billion people can use simultaneously. It's going to be hard to weed out everything, but it's clear that they have a ways to go. Radio Angel says, so true, Speaker AJ. I read a statistic the other day that 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with a mental illness in their lifetime. We can't be blaming that many people for something that they are statistically not responsible for. Let's see. Dire Raven Stag says it's less mental illness and more entitlement. As a former PCA fundy kid, aka the Mike Pence kind of Christian, that mindset is rampant in those groups, that if you're a dude, you're the center of the universe and everyone else owes you stuff. And if you don't get it, you can do whatever it takes to get what you want. And I think that ideology is kind of rampant in the U.S., given that we are culturally Christian, and that's a very large Christian sect, IDK. So I guess I don't know. So I think I was talking about that a little bit ago. I think there is a sense, and I don't think it's native to the religion. I don't want to diminish Christianity any more than I want to diminish Judaism. We have our fundamentalists too. It was a fundamentalist Jew who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin for trying to make peace. And so the thing is, I don't think it's native to the religions themselves. I think it's more native to an entitled sense of patriarchy that is supported by religious teachings. Again, there was somebody in the Jew Curious School, Chris, was asking me last week about definitions of adultery, and doing a little research on that, was seeing the difference between Christian views of patriarchy and Jewish views of patriarchy, whereas Christians look at the story of Adam and Eve and after the fall, as it says. We don't call it that. But after Adam and Eve take a bite out of that apple and they get kicked out of the garden, there's a passage saying, man will rule over women. And the Christian view of that is that's a decree by God, that it is proper and right for men to rule over women. The traditional Jewish view of that is it's an observation rather than a decree, right? When that story comes out, or when that narrative of creation is circulating, it's an observation that they live in a patriarchal time, and perhaps this story was written to explain that, not necessarily decree that, right? So in Christianity, it's a mitzvah. For patriarchy is a mitzvah in that sense. It's a commandment. Whereas the Jewish view of that is that that was an observation that when that story was being written and passed around, men dominated women. And that has to do with agriculture more than anything else. Actually, pre-Jewish societies were as often matriarchal, and property passing from women, women in the family to other women in the family, and men were just along for the ride. So, right, I think if you view your scripture as giving men a natural right to dominate over women, then you're willing to do all sorts of things to denigrate women, and that's not something I want to teach here. Let's see. T Fox RPG says, yes, perhaps the people who are committing these acts of genocidal violence have mental health issues, but understanding that mental health issues just make them vulnerable to fascist rhetoric is important. Yeah. KG Wilcox says, thanks, Speaker AJ. My friend used to tell me that the doors of mental institutions were locked from the inside to prevent the gentle people inside from those who would harm them on the outside. And Triggers and Viv says, until Ronald Reagan closes institutions. So that's a piece of it too. We've shown a great in the Reagan era. I don't know that it was Reagan necessarily, although he was partially responsible for it. In that time, in the 80s, there was a mass disinvestment in mental health, and we've borne the consequence of that since. Let's see. Ghost Wolfie says this mental illness claim by people in power who are not taking responsibility for their hateful rhetoric is really problematic. If all race hate is nothing but mental illness, Hitler was simply nuts. So was Stalin. So was Mussolini, etc., etc. Anyone that obsessed with hate is obviously a little whacked, but they know what they're doing. They are responsible for their hate and their vicious acts. That's a very important point. When you ascribe this to a pathology, then you take away the responsibility of the perpetrators. And if we don't hold the perpetrators and those who encourage them responsible, then we'll never stop this. That's just my Rashi on that, my comment on that. Great point, Ghost Wolfie says, KG Wilcox, I agree. K. Dixie says, we actually studied the result of putting many mental patients out into the street because it greatly increased the homeless population. So that's something that's happening as well. Triggers and Viv says, mental illness isn't normal, or is it today's normal? That's a good question. The genetic mental illness that is passed down to other generations is a cause, but not all the time. As people continue to populate, it won't get better. That's my belief. Mental hospitals help control that. Then it was abused by those who weren't predisposed to passing it to other generations. So I really appreciate everybody sharing your voice on this. I know this is a difficult topic, and it's triggering for some people, and it makes me upset that we have to keep talking about it, but I don't like the alternative. The fact that this seems to be happening more and more, and we're not really doing anything substantive to stop it. And that's why it keeps happening. And so I think, yes, people said this 10 shootings ago. We've become numb to it. We've succumbed to a sense of powerlessness. And I don't have a specific recommendation that I think is going to stop any of this. My goal with the Jew Curious show and the other things that I teach is to not keep playing defense, but to go on the offense. Because part of what's going on right now in the rhetoric of hate that's out there is certain groups with hateful ideologies and fascist motives are always on the offense. And people who oppose them are always caught on the defense. I don't know if this makes sense to people, but it's still formulating in my mind, is they're putting out a positive message of white supremacist patriarchy, and they keep spinning out that message and ignoring people who disagree with them, targeting people who disagree with them on a local and national level, and it puts the people who disagree with it on the defense. And I say, let's go on the offense. I say, let's teach a Torah of justice and mercy. Let us spread the word that human beings are all responsible for one another. Let's spread the word that every human being was created in the image of God. And it's, what is it? There's no defense like a good offense, as they say. that's my goal. And so I don't speak about these issues often. There are some rabbis whose clear mission is to get the excessive numbers of guns off the street, who focus on particular issues related to refugees, particular issues related to race relations. I don't dwell, just looking over the course of my videos, I'm mostly trying to teach about Judaism. I'm going to continue to put those Jewish messages out into the world that are contrary to the rhetoric of hate, the rhetoric of subordination of the other, and I'm dedicated to going on offense on this position. So that's what I'm here to do. And this has been probably taking fewer questions today, but I thought it was important that we talk about this, and I hope and I appreciate everybody else sharing their voice as well. Speaker AJ says, I tried yesterday to remember all the mass shootings that have happened in the last decade and started to cry when I realized I couldn't remember half of them. It's so much. Yesterday at Shacharit, we read a prayer for working to stop gun violence. Ghost Wolfie says, does anyone else remember when a certain high-profile actor said that all these horrid anti-Semitic comments and then went into rehab to cure his bigotry, and then he came out as bad as he ever was because he took no responsibility for his thoughts and behavior? It became a trend at one point. Misbehave and just go into rehab because there's no choice involved, but there is. It's always a choice to be decent or to be hateful. Just saying. Triggers and Viv says, let us be the good examples, not the exception. So I really appreciate that. The prayers and the intentions that people are putting into the world. Radio Angel says there were over 290 mass shootings this year in the U.S. Year's about halfway over, so if that gives you a sense of scale. Ghost Wolfie says, reminder, the federal gun assault ban expired in 2004, and our government let it expire. There are actually a couple of states, I was just reading this, California and one other state, I forget whether it was maybe Colorado, sort of reinstituted it, saying yes, it's assault rifles are banned. The ban on assault rifles at a federal level has expired, but California and one other state extended them within the bounds of the state. So thank you everybody for being here today. We have to cut this a little bit short because I have some rabbi stuff that I got to do across town. I appreciate people weighing in on this. I appreciate people learning this with me. I hope if you can find my link up there on this particular passage of Sanhedrin, I think the more we get out this into the world, the more humane people become, the safer everybody gets, and I'm going to keep on the offense about this rather than just reacting with shock and sadness every time this happens. So thank you all for being here today. I hope our learning did honor to the victims of these horrible crimes, and I want to pray for comfort for their families and strength for those who are working to heal the people in the moment and take the risk out of the world in the near future. So it's a great sentiment to close on, as Triggers and Viv says, keep on loving. And I think that's the best. This may sound harif or football or kind of macho, but I think that's the best offense we could be on right now, is keep on loving, keep taking care of each other. And until next time, heroes, peace.